I'm going to, I made you a panelist as well because you can prompt some questions when the time comes. Veena is seeing multiple screens. Oh, really? Interesting. I'm only seeing one. Sridhar, are you seeing multiple screens? Is also seeing multiple screens? Okay, let me see what we're doing here. Screen sharing. It's my screen that should be seeing, but I guess maybe because of the. Anyway, let's see. It should work. Good morning to everybody in India. I guess it's about 10 o'clock for you. For our presenters in California, Professor Scotty Craig and Professor Som Sohoni. It's about 9:30, and for me, it's a little after midnight. So I had a little nap and got up again. This is Krishna Vedula from the University of Massachusetts at Lowell, and I want to thank you all for joining us. It's an exciting program that we have for this, so we will have a series of webinars, and not the total 8. We just, I think that was a misunderstanding. We just have a series of maybe 2, 3, or 4 webinars, so the first one today will be an overview, and then there'll be some home assignments and so on, and so the topic is, as we have publicized, is research methods for publishing and reviewing papers in engineering education. You've all seen this handout that I'm showing, which has the summary and the audience, and then the 2 presenters, Professor Scotty Craig and then Professor Som Sohoni, as you can see in the screen here. The important thing to realize is Professor Scotty Craig is in a program called Human Systems Engineering. He has his PhD in experimental psychology with a focus on cognitive psychology, and has done a postdoc at a learning center in Pittsburgh. And his current research is at the intersection of human cognition, technology, and learning sciences. So that's very very significant that he is our background that brings to us a wealth of experience about how human beings learn. And then of course we have Professor Som Sohoni, who's also from Arizona State University. Has his bachelor's from India, and then a PhD from Cincinnati. He is in the computer science and electrical engineering area, and he's involved with the engineering education and computer science education, in addition to computer architecture and performance analysis. So he has blended his background in actual electrical engineering with his interest in engineering education. So this is a good team that we have here, who is ready to go. And let us see. I'm going to hand it over to Scotty Craig. Thank you very much, and I'm going to just make you the presenter right now. And once again, you can click show my screen. Yeah, go ahead and click show my screen, Scotty.
Okay, got it. And from the beginning. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you for turning it over. I'm gonna now give the floor to Soham and let him begin.
Okay. So hi everyone. I just want to thank Krishna for making this happen, and obviously a great debt to Scotty, my co-presenter, who will actually be our main presenter because he brings in some really great insight from his background, as Krishna was saying. Scotty, do you want to go to the next slide?
Sure.
Yeah. So I'm going to give talk about the objectives of this seminar series, and also the webinar series, and then I'll have a brief note on the next slide, and then Scotty is going to do most of the talking, starting on slide 4. So the idea here is to provide an overview of paper writing and reviewing, but with a specific focus on the scholarship of teaching and learning. And Scotty actually brings in a lot of rich background from applied psychology and dealing with human subjects in general, because a lot of times the scholarship of teaching and learning ends up being about studying human subjects and how well they are picking up things that we're trying out in the classroom. And that's not the only kind of study that you can do, but that's one of the more common types of studies. So that's essentially what the series will focus on for the most part. We want to describe research methods that are typical for classroom-based studies, as I said, because these are the more common ones. Point out potential pitfalls, which is, things that can go wrong, there's a huge list of those actually, and provide pointers to resources that we've come across over the years that are both from the field that Scotty comes from, but also my own experience for the past decade working in engineering education. And whatever resources there are in engineering ed as well as some CS ed that I've been involved in. And finally, the last webinar I would say would be touching on reviewing and some common mistakes that novice reviewers tend to make. Next slide, Scotty. Right. So just a quick note, both Scotty and I have a very interactive teaching style, and it's kind of hard to pull that off sometimes in a webinar, especially a distributed hosted webinar like this. But we want to try to make it as interactive as we can. So if you have any questions, please go ahead and ask those questions. I believe there is in this setup somewhere where you can raise your hand.
Absolutely. So many of them are familiar with the chat feature, and just let me remind them that if they go into the panel, they go under questions or chat, and then they can send questions. Some of you already have started saying hello and so on. So start doing that as soon as a thought comes to your mind, and then at the appropriate time, in the middle of 20 minutes or so, or halfway through the session, I will read them out, and either Scotty or Soham will respond. Okay, go ahead.
That's a great point, Krishna. Thanks. And in fact, I'll keep an eye out as well. So while Scotty is talking, if I see some relevant questions pop up that really belong on that slide, I'll go ahead and.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, that's good. We have two of you, so that's good. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, we can tag team on that. And we have some activities planned. I hope we can get to the first one today, and we'll see how that goes. So. I'd like to welcome Scotty now to take the floor, and I'm sure we'll be in for a great webinar from Scotty.
Well, we'll see about that. I promise to do my best, though. Hello, everybody. As has already been said, I do have a decent amount of experience from the area of education and also experience with writing. I've been doing this now for a couple of decades in writing, and not just in writing and publishing myself, in which I've published over like 70 articles, books, and other things such as book chapters, but also in teaching and working with students and other faculty in helping them to improve the writing process. And really understand what needs to be in there. And kind of, as has already been said to you, the purpose of this talk and this series of talks is to kind of give you this kind of a high-level overview of what are the major steps, what are the major things you need to think about and focus on. So, what I'd like to start with is talking to you in general about what a research article is. And some of this is going to be very basic information and very high level, because I want to start out very high level. And what we're going to do is eventually work down. I just realized I'm gesturing with my hands, which you cannot see. But we're going to actually work down from this broad level to start getting to more specific, concrete examples later on. But we want to make sure you have a high level structure that you can pin all the other information that we're going to be giving to you later on onto. As we said, we would like this to be as interactive as possible. So please do ask questions. Both.
I noticed, Soham, you're showing your video. That might not be a bad idea to do for a couple of seconds. Scotty, you want to do that for just a couple of seconds?
How do you do that?
Sadi figured that out. I mean, Soam figured that out. You click on that
Oh,
video.
there's a video button.
Yeah, just show your face, and we'll not leave it on for more than a couple of seconds because bandwidth
Hello,
issues.
everybody.
A lot of these places in India are remote areas, and so there's bandwidth issues, and so that's me. Hi there, and the middle of the night, I'm in. Okay, so that's great. So I'm just going to turn that off.
So I'm going to go ahead and now you hit all of us. Now we're gone.
Turn it off too. That way we're not
just show him again.
Bandwidth problems. Go ahead.
Okay, so everybody, so please, as you can see, as our organizers, we are being interactive now, but please also feel free to be more interactive with us. Because one thing we know is you may have seen from my summary, one thing that I have done research in one of the areas is on the role of affect and the role that affect or emotions play during learning. And if we can make this, one thing we know, if we can make this a more enjoyable experience and a less intimidating experience, you'll be more engaged and you'll actually retain more information. I've also been told that some of you are watching this alone, but also others are watching it in groups. So if you are watching it in groups, I highly encourage you as a group to have group discussions amongst yourselves. Talk about what you may understand and what you may not understand, because you'll probably be surprised, and that something you don't understand may be something that other people in the room don't understand. And that's why it's also good to ask questions as you have them. Because again, if you realize something that you don't understand, a lot of the other participants in the webinar also may not understand it, and you may be able to articulate it, and they may not have got there yet. So you'll actually be helping them out by asking those questions. So please do ask them. And if we can't get to everything today, as I said, we can address it in future sessions. So that being said, we're going to move on to talk about a little bit about the anatomy of the research article. So one disadvantage that I have right now doing this is that I can't see all of you and I can't ask. It's difficult to ask more interactive questions like, well, what do all of you know about writing? How much experience do you have? So because I don't know that, I am starting at a very basic level. So what are the basic parts of every research article? Well, there are 5 major ones that you're going to actually have to write a little bit on. First is the abstract. Then after that, you go into an introduction phase where you're introducing what your research problem is. So what is it? Why is it important? Why should I care about your paper? What is already known about it? Because I can guarantee you in the hundreds of years of research that's been going on, somebody at some point has done something related to your question. So you need to review that. And end with very clear statements about what you want to do. And I'll get into more detail on that later. Next, you go into the methods where you discuss what research project did you do? What did you do? Step by step. Explain to your reader what process you went through to find and collect the data that you have. Next, results. For the results, you're presenting your findings. This is the first time in the research paper where you start to get a voice. Up until this point, you're basing most of what you're saying on what other people have done. But in the results, you actually start to say, hey, this is what I found. Then you broaden out your results to a discussion. This is when you really actually get to put more of your interpretation, your spin, what you think these results mean, and what you think, why you think these results are important. One thing I'd like to draw your attention to is this hourglass shape. And there's a reason why it is a kind of an hourglass shape, or 2 pyramids on top of each, or a pyramid on top of another pyramid, because you really should think about a research article in kind of this hourglass type of shape. In that, with the introduction, you start out very broad. As you moved towards your method section, getting ready to talk about what you're doing, you get much more narrow you get to the method section, you're getting very, very specific. Down to the end of the method section where you're giving people precise information on exactly what you did. So you go from very broad questions, research questions, why is this important, to specifically what you did at that tip point here at the bottom of the methods. You start to broaden that back out in the results. Talking about what is it that you found? What analyses did you do? What was found from these? What does that mean to your overall research questions? So you're starting to broaden out, but then you hit the discussion, and that's when you can start going really broad. So based on these results, this is how you can start to answer and what information you provided to the research question. And additionally, from that discussion, you move on to how is this related to other people's work. So based on what everybody else has known, this is what you found, and where are you going to go from there? What's still open? What are the major contributions? Very, very broad at the end of the discussion. And I don't know if there have been any questions now, by yet or not, and because everybody else has gone quiet. So the other two presenters who can talk, feel free to chime in also. Don't just let me keep droning on, because I will.
Yeah, there are some questions, but that's if you want to just get to that, we can quickly read them out. Besides saying hello, there's things. Since I did prompt them to ask questions, they've asked some pretty basic questions, which I'm sure you're going to answer. Like Dave Wright says, how to read a scientific journal. Obviously, you're going to get to that. Then Syed Mushtaq says, what percentage of each part in these 5 parts of paper, in 8 pages, for example, what percentage would be in each of these 5 parts?
That's a good question.
Ravindra Bell says, what are various research publications? How do they differ in structure? And then, is there any rule for publishing research article, like age, qualifications, etc.? So why don't you take one of them at a time? Maybe start.
Yes, I'd actually. There's a.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So which one? Okay, I'm going to start with the percentage question. Yeah. The 5 parts. Yeah. So of the 5 parts, notice of the pyramid that I gave you, abstract wasn't even on there. It technically would be a little bitty thing sitting on the top of the pyramid. So the abstract is, you want to make sure the information is accurate, it's non-evaluative, and it's concise. Abstracts are very short. They're usually a couple hundred words. Very, very, very short. And it's a complete overview of the entire paper. So that's the smallest section.
There's a 300 to 500 word limit on the abstract as well, quite often. So
okay, yeah, and it does vary by journal and outlet. So yeah, it's true. I have seen them as high as 500 before. Generally, in my area, it's 100 to 200 words.
Yeah, that's more typical. 100, 150 is about the right number. Yeah.
Yeah. And I find the abstract to be one of the hardest sections to write, because probably as you may have realized, I tend to be verbose. So it's difficult for me to write that very concise summary. So if you look now at the different pieces of this pyramid, you can get an idea of kind of the percentages. I won't say it's 100% set. Like 40% should be this, 40% should be that. That's not the case. But what it tends to be is the introduction tends to be the longest section of the paper, followed by the discussion, which also tends to be the second longest, if not the longest. Sometimes the discussion is longer than the introduction if you have more to talk about. Results, depending on how many analyses you have to do, they can be one of the shortest sections. Methods is usually a little bit longer than the results, but the thing about the methods, you can write method sections very, very short, but usually if you do that, you're skimping on detail. And that could be problematic for publications, because if reviewers cannot figure out what you were doing in the method section, they can't figure out what study you ran, how you collected your data, what you used, it's not going to bode very well for your paper getting accepted. So you want much more detail in the methods section. What I have told students before or previously, so you can look at about a 40% of the paper being introduction, 30% being discussion, and that other 30% being a blend between methods and results. That is not by any means a hard and fast rule.
But I'd say it varies from paper to paper, the kind
Yeah.
of paper that you're trying to write.
Yes.
There's also something there's a couple of things I wanted to point out. One, when you look at a typical dissertation in the engineering field or a master's thesis, you'll find that it'll be much more bloated in the middle than what this hourglass indicates. So we do, when we write up a thesis, or especially in even a lot of papers, technical papers in, say, electrical engineering or computer engineering, they tend to be very results oriented, and the idea is the results section takes real prominence, while in psychology or more so in education research, the discussion section usually tends to be the most important place where you spend a lot of time.
Yeah,
so those
that
are
is
the
true.
two things I wanted to point out. And not
That's
every paper.
that's a good point that you raised, Somdi, that I think that addresses one of the questions about how do research publications differ in different types of research publications. Yeah.
So yeah, and that's actually a good question. But in most of them, I mean, the method section and even with psychology, education, and more in engineering, the methods it's an important section. I just really want to stress that because I usually find that the methods section is the main section that people tend to neglect. And that, as you see in the hourglass, it narrows. But what I find is that people tend to want to jump to that very narrow part very quickly, and you shouldn't do that. You need details. And the same thing with results. You need to have results to the level that it's sufficient to the journal that you're writing. And that's a little bit of advice which I'll also add in right now, which, as you can see from the discussion that we've already had, different journals have different expectations. Before you submit to a journal that you've never submitted to before, you need to read a good amount of articles from that journal to see what the general culture for that journal is. Do they tend to want a lot more details in the results? Or do they want a lot more details in discussion? And you can easily do that by looking at the articles that are published there. Any other points from the other two?
Well, there are a few others, but I think you can go on and we'll get to that because I think there were some questions that I'm sure you'll address them later on.
Yeah. So actually, I wanted to address one other question that was asked now, which was the how to read a research article. And this is actually a common problem. Because when you are starting to read articles, especially if you're a novice just starting to read, I still remember back in when I was undergraduate, graduate student, just starting out, reading these research articles and getting to know them and getting to understand them. It was a very daunting process. It was very difficult, and it was time-consuming to get through them. And one of the best things, actually, that kind of a little bit when I was an undergraduate, it was a more senior graduate student told me. She was German, and she was like, I remember when I first started reading, I would get so worn out from reading articles because it would take me so long, hours sometimes, to really read and understand an article. She was like, but don't worry, it gets better. You eventually learn how to read articles. So if you're at that stage when you're early on reading research articles, it can be very, very Um, well, it can be difficult.
Hiring.
Pull there. Yeah, yeah. Um, so a little bit of advice, because honestly, as a novice, you're going to read articles differently than experts. That's one big thing we know about differences between novices and experts. But you are going to need a lot more detail. So for example, if I pick up an article in my area, I'm going to skim the introduction to see what's there, to see if there's anything interesting, because I probably already know a lot of it. But you really need to, especially if you're building knowledge in an area, you really should pay a lot of attention to the introduction. And methods are useful for understanding what people did. But the biggest problem I see with novices in reading, when they're reading articles, comes to the results. Because the way people present results and the types of results that people present can vary widely and be very different. So you can easily spend an hour on results section sometimes, just trying to understand it, and that's good. If it's something new and you might want to use those analyses, it's good to spend that time sometimes. But you also have to realize that, I mean, these are experts who wrote these results, and sometimes you can just trust what they told you to be accurate and hope that reviewers have done the same. So it's not always as important for you to really get into the much detail on the results, but focus on introduction, understanding the methods, and the discussion. And really go in ready to spend the idea and spend the time to understand the ideas in the introduction. One other bit of information I'll tell you when reading articles. Sometimes it's good to just read them to understand them, but it's also good to read them for answers to specific questions. Because you're probably reading that research article because you have an idea or a research question or a topic in mind. So it's often good to keep that topic like on a notepad beside you as you're reading. And then as you figure out the interesting answers from that paper that you're reading, write them down. And that will help you to review it later and will help you to remember it much later also. One more thing I want to say about this real fast, and with the reading articles. You also have to realize that there's usually a very large literature of articles out there. One of my colleagues here always tells students that you don't, especially if you're doing a thesis or a dissertation, that basically you are not ready until you've read at least 100 or 200 articles. Now, having said that, don't panic. He says that to scare students. But the main point and take home for that is to remember that there's a lot of research out there. Always look, always search, and keep searching for that. And keep searching for new information. Because there's always new articles. So I'm sorry, if somebody else has something else to say, please interrupt me.
Yeah, Rupa asked a question that about the if you're publishing a literature review paper, what must be the contents of that kind of paper?
Oh, that's actually that's an interesting question. So a research paper or a research article is much different than a review article. So if you're thinking about a review article, what you're going to have is a lot more of an introduction. You will actually have a little bit of the methods, but the methods is more, how did you go about searching for articles? What was your procedure for finding articles that you put into this? How did you constrain yourself? Results. Again, you do still have the results in that because it's what did you find? What were the general themes that you found from that? then discussion. The important thing with review articles for discussion, an important thing to remember, is that what you need to do is to give a good synthesis of the literature. So you're summarizing it, but you're also not just summarizing it, you're summarizing it with your original research question in mind and talking about what is known about the answers to that research question, what is still open. And that's what makes a good review paper. And that's that in a very concise answer, which the two of you have something to add to that.
I'd like to add a couple of things.
Go ahead, Tom. So I'm going to add whatever. Go ahead, yeah.
Right. So one of the things to note is, as Scotty said, you want to take notes when you're reading a paper. So this is answering that question on what do I do when reading a paper, or how do I read it. And the other thing to keep in mind is, why are you reading the paper? So that's not something we've talked about yet, right? Not in any detail, for sure. Yeah. And the reason for bringing that up is because maybe you are reading it because that's going to inform your work. That's the most natural reason for reading some paper. And so that can actually very quickly tell you, as Scotty was saying in the introduction itself, is this, and looking at the abstract and the introduction, is this going to answer this question on, why am I reading this? Is this going to be a goal for me? Is this paper going to be useful? Because a lot of the reading a research paper, a big part of that is really identifying whether this paper is worth my time or not. Yeah. So you want to make sure that you think about the why the whole time, and that kind of goes to the review paper as well. So if you're reviewing the literature and writing a review paper, even then you should ask yourself this question, of course, to begin with: why are you doing this literature review? Is it because someone asked you to do it, or is there some better reason for doing this review? So that's what I wanted to point out.
Yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, okay. The question about, let's see, Shamala says, a research paper with an idea and no results, is that a valid research paper?
Okay, so I'm going to take a strong stance here. No, it is not. If it is not a research paper, if you don't have any data to back it up, it's not a full research paper as far as a research article. It could still be a review article. And I'm not sure if that makes sense to you or not.
Let me explain that a little bit. I know what Scotty is getting at. So the idea is this whole results, right? What does it mean? Yeah. And most people associate results with some kind of experiment that they did. So we tried this out, and we collected some data, and that's the results that we're presenting. So what Scotty meant by no, it's not a research paper if you don't have results in there, isn't that it's not a research paper if you didn't do an experiment. That's the difference. But it could very well be that, as Scotty was saying, if you did a review which was driven by some important reason for doing the review, and as part of the review you have learned something new that you want to present to the world, right? I did a review and I found out that blah, blah, blah. There is this big gap in the research. That's what you found out. Yeah. And if you can really articulate that well, then you have some results, and then you have some basis for discussion.
Yeah, and that's it exactly. Because in both of those are both presenting two different new types of knowledge.
Is there a limit to the number of pages?
That's a good question. So that actually completely depends on the venue that you're trying to publish at. If it is, and you usually should, before you start writing a paper, remember earlier I said that you go to the journal or you go to whatever you want to publish it, and you start reading them. They will also have instructions for authors, and it will tell you if there are limits. If you're trying to publish something at a conference, in a proceedings, normally those are fairly short. And they do have very set page limits. Some journals also have page limits, but they tend to be longer, and they'll tend to be word limits. Some journals are open. I've seen journals with everywhere from a 6 to 7 page limit to open-ended journals that will publish 100-page articles. So journals can vary widely, and you really need to look it up on the journal website.
A more specific question from Azim. In computer science, you have lots of algorithms. How to deal with big algorithms in journal publications?
Oh, yeah, that's a good formatting question. I don't know if you have a quick answer to that or not, Soham.
Yeah, I think that's taking us away from some of the stuff that we want to talk about. I mean, let's keep in mind this is a lot. This is going to be focused on engineering education research. And if, as part of CS education research, there is an algorithm-specific thing that you want to put into the paper, I'll be happy to take that question offline. You can email me. I also wanted to point out, I've put a link in the chat window. I don't think it's going to all the participants, though, but I think Krishna can take care of that. It's the ICTIEE call for papers, and they talk about a page limit there, 5 to 6.
6 pages, yeah. Quick question before we move on to the main.
Actually, can I just address that, the last question real fast again, with the algorithms? So the one thing I would recommend for algorithms, if you do need to present a very lengthy algorithm for some reason, do not put it directly in the text of your document. There are often supplemental sections which are called appendices, and it's usually better to put it into the appendices and reference it there. Then readers, if they want to, can go and look at it and then come back to where they were reading, and it doesn't break the flow of the writing. Okay.
And in your paper too, the handouts we've given out, the second paper actually has a bunch of appendices. So just as an example.
And I was about to say, I thought we had examples of appendices. So.
Let me quickly ask this question by Navneet Singh. What will be the difference between these cones when we're talking about research in engineering education versus research in some regular engineering topic like computer science or nanotechnology?
Right, so this is something I was alluding to earlier, that I think the regular papers tend to have a lot of bloat in the middle, so the methods and the results get a lot more focus. At least that's been my knowledge in the research that I've done in computer architecture for sure, because the introduction tends to be very small in the sense that it's just setting the stage for why the work was done, and they quickly move on to this is the experiment that we set up and these are the results, and they go on and on about the results. Whereas in the education literature, there is a more, I would say, a stronger focus in contextualizing the research and building on top of the work that other people have done. I think as computer engineers, maybe the field has not been there for so long. Maybe that's why we tend to have very short introductions, and we tend to write papers that are somewhat independent of other papers, I would say. Of course, they build on work done by others, but the acknowledgement of that and the attention to detail on how, say, one theory really helps explain this phenomenon versus another theory, that is not seen in the technical literature that I've come across as much.
Question on case studies. I think a couple of comments on case studies. If people write case study papers, would that be something you want to comment on? What does that mean? What is it?
Yeah, that's a good question. So case studies are a special type of it's a special type of research. So case studies are still very similar to a research article, just like you would see here, and it's the same basic format. The difference with these specific case studies is they tend to be, the number of participants that you have in them tends to be small, and that you tend to have 1, 2, 3, maybe up to 5 at most. But generally, a lot of times it's 1 or 2, and you're trying to find, this is how this worked in this case. So that's the primary difference between a research article and basically case study type research. And really, however, the different types of research again is a little bit beyond what we were going to talk about today. We can add some information into future sessions if that is an interest.
Question about referencing. Is there a limit in mentioning references and also the standard method of writing them?
Yes. Yes. So there are a lot of different types and types of references. And there's a lot of different formats, I should say. And there are really 5 very specific types of formats that tend to be used. This is one of those things where I have to kind of default to the guideline for authors. Any place where you're going to be writing something to will have a guideline for authors. In that guideline, they will specify specifically what they want and what type they want. And this is something that people often worry about. One of the best things I've found for referencing and to help speed things up, there are actually programs out there which will help to auto format references for you. And I know, Soham, you use some of those if you want to talk about some of the more common ones.
Yeah, I currently use RefWorks because ASU supports that. And previously, I believe I was using some kind of other reference manager because my previous institution supported that. There are some free ones out there too, but I've never used them. One quick last note on that is Microsoft Word has its own reference manager. You can use that as well. And let me make a quick suggestion here. I'm glad that this is turning out to be a very interactive session. It's great that it's not complete silence on the other end. Yeah. Although we're getting the questions, I guess, secondhand from Krishna, but I think he's doing a great job curating them. But I think we should move on to the next.
Okay, so we'll save the remaining questions for later, for towards the end. Maybe let's time ourselves now. Time management. We're done with 40 minutes, so we've got about 20 minutes left, and so just let's plan accordingly, and we can always take the other questions later on.
Right. I was hoping we'd cover a little bit on the introduction.
Absolutely. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead and let's do that, and then we can pick up the questions at the end or the next session. Okay.
Maybe in the last 5 minutes we'll dedicate.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead, Scotty. Yeah.
Okay, so we'll kind of keep going, and again, I'd like to echo that what's already been said. Thank you. Please continue to be interactive and asking questions because these have been really good, and they've helped us to understand kind of what your level of understanding are and what your needs are. So they've been very useful for us also. So now what I want to do is keep going, continue on with our overview, and talk about basically the 12 steps of writing. And I'm pulling these directly from Robert Sternberg's books, which is Tips on Writing. And it's a publication guide for authors. And these are his 12 basic steps that he gives and talking about in the book. First, when writing an article, proofread it. That is one of those things that sounds obvious, but after you have written the article and rewritten it, you always want to spend time before you give it out to anybody to do several rounds of proofreading, because you'll be surprised on what little errors you will catch from that proofreading process. And sometimes it's even good in the proofreading process to start at the end of the paper and go from the end to the top, the beginning of the paper, basically to go backwards. And it really helps you to catch any little proof typo, incorrect word, and things such as that. Because, in the end, those little errors are not always detrimental to having something written, but what they can hurt, and this is one thing you kind of have to, a theme that I'll be bringing back time and time again, throughout the series is that what they will hurt is your credibility as an author. And when you are writing something, your credibility is what you're standing on. If you lose that credibility, you will not be able to basically persuade your audience, your readers, that you actually are competent in what you're doing and what you can do. So, oops, that's the first one. Second, peer feedback. Once you have written your paper, you think it is ready. You have proofread it. Before you send it out for publication, get some form of peer feedback. And the second point, I cannot stress how important this is enough. Because as you are writing it and rewriting it and re-editing it and editing it and proofreading it, you will know exactly what you want to say at a specific point. And there could be places that are completely incoherent to people who are not the writer, who are not you. But you won't see that because basically what you have built is kind of this cognitive schema of what you want to say. And you will automatically start filling that in when you're reading. But once you give it to a peer who doesn't have that built up, they can very quickly tell you, I don't understand what you're saying right here. And if you're giving peer feedback, that's the thing. Once you start asking people for peer feedback, you have to get ready for them to ask you for that also. And you will find that being able to give peer feedback to people and getting used to giving that type of peer feedback will actually help to improve your writing also. So it actually helps in both directions. But as far as peer feedback goes, take what they say seriously. Even if you think that makes perfect sense, it's better to get that and make it more clear at that point than to get that feedback from a reviewer. Because if it doesn't make sense to a peer, it's probably not going to make sense to a reviewer either. State your problem. The third point, clearly state your problem and organize the paper around it.
Scotty, I wanted to
Yes.
talk a little bit about the peer feedback. Just
yes.
Point.
As I said,
yeah.
As you know, once I start going, I don't stop. So
yeah. Well, so that's why I'm here. so as Scotty was saying, you might disagree with the peer feedback that you got, but you really should take it very seriously. And if you think the person who's giving you feedback has given you completely wrong feedback, that you completely disagree with it, give it to someone else to give you feedback. Yes. And if two people are both saying the same thing, that maybe this section isn't clear at all, or these results need to be beefed up, or whatever the feedback might be that you completely disagree with, if more than one person is giving you that feedback, at that point you should really stop being defensive about what you've written and take their feedback and solve the problems before you send it out to review.
Yeah. So in the third point, moving on to the third point now, clearly stating your problem and organizing the paper around it. We've already touched on this one a couple of times when we were discussing the previous slide. You have a reason why you're writing this paper. You have a specific problem that you conducted research on. Hopefully you have a very specific research question. You need to make sure that statement, that research question, that research statement, or your research problem, all three of those terms are used interchangeably, is stated clearly early on in the paper. Because the last thing you want, especially a reviewer, to do is to think that you're going to be writing about something and to get that into their head, but you're really talking about a completely different research problem. So you need to get that to them early. I usually tell, the advice I usually give is to make sure that research problem is stated clearly in the first paragraph, or at least in the first or second paragraph of the paper. And then you organize the rest of the paper around it. So periodically, you want to come back and remind the reader and the reviewer what that research question is. So if you talk about papers in the literature review, you might want to explicitly say, like, so what does that paper that you just reviewed that somebody else found, what does that mean in relation to your actual research problem? So it helps to build coherence throughout the paper. And some of these other ones, some of these steps from Sternberg are very practical. Number 4 is one of them. Cite likely referees. Referees, what he means there are reviewers. So if you know that there are a few big people in the area that you're writing in who've done seminal important papers, or who have recently published papers, or especially who have recently published papers in that journal, you should be citing those papers, because they're most likely the people who are going to be reviewing you. And you need to think, what would they like? What do they want? If they see their name, obviously they're going to think you did a great job on reviewing papers. If they don't see themselves cited there, obviously you have been sloppy with your literature review. And you start to lose credibility in their eyes. So make sure you think about who are the people who may review it, who are the major groups, have you cited them? The 5th one is one that, which is the 5th point, clearly state the new contribution. This is the point where I think that a lot of papers tend to fall on. They don't quite do this. I'm even actually honestly bad about doing this myself, because you're writing it, you think that it is obvious. Same point for peer feedback. You think that the things that a lot of times that peer feedback people find, your peers find, are obvious. It's there. Same thing, a lot of times you can think that that contribution for your paper is there. Why can't they see it? But you don't want to rely on a reviewer or a reader to do that. So make sure that you explicitly state the new contribution. Now, if we were actually in a more interactive in-person class, the question I would ask right now is, where should you state that? That is one of the big, and I would actually have people talk about and discuss where would you want to do that. The best place for that is usually in the discussion. I usually like to give it a little bit in the beginning of the discussion and then hit on it pretty strongly at the end of the discussion. Now, there's one other big place where you need to make sure you clearly state your contribution that a lot of people miss. That is the abstract. So generally the last line of your abstract should be, what is your new contribution? Why is that paper important? What did you find? Point 6, show how you build on others. Don't just randomly review people's articles. You need to show what they found and how what you find connects. And you do that again in the discussion section. So that's point 6. 7, data analysis and interpretation. Again, we've already talked about this, so I'm going to be brief. But you need to make sure that your data analysis and your interpretation is correct. And you need to make sure that data analysis you're doing is appropriate for the journal that you're in or the outlet that you are targeting. Different journals like different outlets. If you are trying to publish in areas that like heavily stats-based quantitative data, and you go in with qualitative research, it's probably going to get rejected, and vice versa. But let me, because I'm more from the quantitative side. So one other caveat from the quantitative side. on data analysis. It is very important that you are doing the right type of statistics for the type of data that you have collected. This is actually one of the biggest problems that that you see usually with reviewing, is that people have done making wrong claims based on the types of data analysis that they're doing. And again, if you don't know, and you may not know, this may be outside of, especially statistical analyses, specifically of this type of data, might be outside of your expertise. And that's perfectly okay, and it's perfectly okay to acknowledge that, and to find somebody who is more of an expert, who can give you guidance. And this is one thing you may have noticed from a couple points already. Yes, you may be the writer, but you should not try to do it alone. Reach out to your peers for assistance and feedback in your writing. Reach out to your peers and your colleagues for data to make sure you've analyzed things correctly. So point 8 is actually highly related to 7, which is that your conclusions need to follow your data. Whatever your data tell you, those are the types of conclusions you should make. They should be in line. That's a very obvious one that people actually mess up on all the time. One of the big mistakes that I see people making, and it's just kind of interesting, which I don't know, again, all of your backgrounds, but if you've done anything with, if you know anything about statistical analysis, correlational data, it is very, a lot of people will fall back on doing a lot of correlation analyses, and then when they get to making conclusions, they'll start bringing causal conclusions and start saying that this, because they started to see a correlation of two variables going in the same direction, they'll start saying that one variable is causing the other variable. And if you're just doing correlational data analysis, you cannot make those types of claims. You can only say there's a relationship. So that's what I'm talking about, and at that point, when I'm talking for point 8. Make sure that if you have made some specific conclusion, make sure you can back that up specifically with your data and you're doing it correctly. Explain clearly, not in excessive detail. As you may have figured out by now, this is not my strong point sometimes. So, be concise. This is another thing that your peer reviewers can also help you with. They can tell you when you're being too verbose. Because really, there's things as a writer that you get excited about, and you want to give tons and tons and tons of detail. Soham can verify this for me, because when I'm writing a research article, especially with introductions, I love reviewing other people's work and talking about it in detail and talking about theory and going into detail on theory. And he's always having to come around behind me. It's like, that's too much. That's too much. Let's cut this out. And I'm like, but no, this is so important. So and that's why it's good to work in collaborative teams often, because you can help catch those flaws that other people have. 10 and 11 actually are tied together. Anticipate likely objections. With that, you need to think about your paper and your findings critically and objectively. Realize that no study is perfect. I'll say that again. No study is perfect, ever. So every study is going to have some limitations that you need to address. Your interpretations also. Sometimes there are possible other interpretations. You need to anticipate what these might be, because it's better for you to address these than for reviewers to find them. Because if reviewers find them, it's much more likely for your paper to be rejected. And finally, step 12, which actually goes back to a previous point, which was 4, write for your readers and for your referees. So there's people who are going to review your papers, your reviewers. Write with them in mind. So you want to write something where it's information that they're going to find interesting and relevant. So Okay,
Right.
now I've kind of force pushed my way through these, so
That's
I
okay.
apologize.
We can elaborate because in the interest of time, I think we should keep on schedule here. So we
Yeah.
pretty much run out of time. So that's so what
Hey,
we
it's
need to do is
exactly 10:30. I never do that.
let's do some housekeeping. Let's do some housekeeping here in terms of what's next kind of thing. And from my point of view, I'm going to collect all the. There've been a lot of other lots of other good questions. I thank you all for presenting those, and I want you all as participants. We have about 65 of you here right now, and maybe more if you're in a small group somewhere. So keep the questions coming, even if you haven't put it up today in the chat session. Send me an email. That's krishna_vedula@uml.edu. You've already been sending me emails registering for this course. So send me questions, and I will compile them all for the presenters, for Scotty and so on to look at before the next session next week. In the meantime, I'm sure they will talk about the 2 papers that have been in the handouts and what they expect from you for you to do between now and the next session, and what they would like to maybe follow up on. So back to you, Soham.
Yeah, that's great, Krishna. I think, as Krishna was saying, this is we will actually tailor our presentations based on your questions. So I think this is great the way it's working out, the fact that we're getting so many questions. When we get the list from Krishna, we will work this week to make sure that next week's seminar actually addresses some of the questions that you have, and we can keep it interactive like that. As far as the 2 papers that we've submitted, we will hit on those in next week's presentation when we cover the introduction section. And if you have the time, I highly recommend that you read at least the introduction sections for each of those papers. And if you do have time, I would say read maybe half the paper for each of those 2 samples, because we will be comparing and contrasting. They're very different kinds of papers. One could say there's sections in one of the papers that are much better than the other. So it might be useful for you to compare in your mind the 2 papers before you come to the next presentation.
I'm going to give Veena Kumar. Can you say something? Veena Kumar is the director of our teacher certification program. I'm unmuted you, Veena. You want to add a minute or so here? Veena Kumar has a background in English, teaching English, and in India, IIT Delhi, and she's the director of our teacher certification program. She's based out of Maryland. Are you back in the US or are you still in India? Veena? Hello? Yeah, I thought I heard her, but I guess.
I think she said something, but then she went away.
She said something and went away. Okay, we'll get her later on. So that's fine. So let us put in any last comments from either Scotty for you, from Scotty.
I'd like to say, well, I'm not Scotty, but
yeah.
Well, given the pace at which we went through and the fact that we're getting so many great questions, I think we can really do probably 6 a series of 6.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think honestly we can even fit it in 4 at this point. So
let's play it by the year.
I don't know. It depends on how much you let me talk.
I think Soham and I can control you. We'll try to control you there.
Yes, I am notorious for putting up one slide and talking.
I understood that already.
And I hope the audience has found this useful. I found it very useful, and my collaboration with Scotty, I found it very useful in general. So one maybe last thought on this is find someone like Scotty to partner with when you write papers, because that helps a lot.
Yeah, so that's good. We're creating a community of researchers, and particularly engineering researchers in India, and this is the beginning of that group. So I think I'm really excited that so many people have joined us today. Thank you all from India, and get back to your classes, teaching, whatever you do at 11 o'clock in the morning, and we will get back to our sleep. All right?
Yes. Thank you, everybody.